Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so pleased that you're able to join us today for this webinar, which we're co-hosting with the Green Grids Initiative. My name is Julia Skorupska. I'm the head of the Powering Past Coal Alliance Secretariat. The Powering Past Coal Alliance is a coalition of over 165 national and subnational governments, financial institutions, companies and organizations working together to accelerate the transition from coal to clean in a way that guarantees the interests of workers and communities. Since the Alliance was founded in 2017 by the UK and Canada, we've really grown. So we now count among our members over a quarter of the world's national governments, subnational governments in coal-dependent regions, financial institutions who are managing over $17 trillion of assets, and some of the world's leading utilities. And this membership gives us a really substantial reservoir of expertise and experience that we draw upon to help governments, utilities, system operators navigate some of the challenges of a transition from coal to clean. And the way we do that is through webinars like these, through bespoke workshops, and also through policy briefings. So I encourage all of you to check out our website or to follow us on social media to see what's coming up, and also get in touch with us if you have ideas about what are the topics, the questions, the challenges that you would like us to cover in future sessions. So today we're going to be talking about how to expand transmission infrastructure. So as we move away from kind of centralized coal power plants to more decentralized renewables, we need to think about what infrastructure is necessary to get that energy to consumers. And I'm really looking forward to hearing today from our members, from our partners, about how they've navigated some of the challenges. And I'm especially delighted that today, to help us pick our way through this really important, but sometimes to the uninitiated, quite complex topic, we have one of the leaders in the field with us here today, and someone who has a genuine knack of picking a way through the complexities, so it all makes sense. So I'm going to hand over now to our moderator, Georgie Skipper, who's one of the co-founders of the Green Grids Initiative, and also as part of the leadership team at Sun Cable, who are developing an integrated system to supply green energy into Australia and into Southeast Asia. We're really pleased to have you here, Georgie, and over to you to take us through the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's such a pleasure to be here today and to welcome everyone to this important discussion about the renewable electricity industry, and in particular, the role of transmission infrastructure in supporting the transition from coal to clean energy. As you heard from Julia, my name's Georgie, and I'm delighted to be moderating this important discussion today. You'll have the opportunity to hear from a range of experts we've gathered from around the world, and to showcase also a new toolkit available to stakeholders, including policymakers, operators, and developers, on how to navigate and to build transmission infrastructure. Allow me to introduce our experts first: Andreas, Marcus, Marietta, and Moketsky. Andreas is an advisor at the Danish Energy Agency Centre for Global Cooperation and has a background in power systems and engineering, and is currently working with India and Vietnam on the integration of renewables into the power grid. Marcus, who joins us from the UK, is the lead for the Green Grids Initiative, seconded from UK National Grid, where he has held senior roles over the past 2 decades, and most notably led National Grid's future energy scenarios and capacity market analysis. From the Philippines, Marietta is a science and research specialist at the Department of Energy at the Government of the Philippines, and has held very senior roles throughout her long-standing career in the energy market sector. Moketsky is the Chief Renewable Energy Investment Officer at the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, a special fund administered by the African Development Bank. He is an expert in energy sector policy and development, energy industry regulation, and energy planning. So welcome all to our panelists. But first of all, why grids? Why do they matter? Well, recently The Economist, the Financial Times, the Washington Post have all written about the role of transmission infrastructure. Indeed, earlier this year, Bill Gates said, "If you care about climate change, you should care about transmission." Renewable energy electrification is the backbone of our global transition because it is electrification and grids that will support our transition to net zero at scale that's required for industrial growth. This is really, really important because grid most abundant to where it's most needed. Annual investment in grids needs to more than double by 2030 to $750 billion and reach over 1 trillion by 2040 to continue on a pathway of 1.5 degrees. Global electricity grids that took 130 years to build need to more than double in length by 2040 and increase by another 25% by 2050. So the challenge at hand is very significant and very difficult. And as we all know, in experts in this sector, there is a lot to uncover in terms of how to actually build and transition our economies utilizing this important transmission infrastructure. So if there's anything we want you to take away from this discussion today, it's that there is no transition without transmission. And I'm going to ask everyone to repeat that later on. But first of all, to kick us off, I'd like to welcome Andreas from Denmark. Welcome, Andreas.
Thank you very much, Georgie. And start my presentations here. Thank you a lot for the introduction, Georgie, and thank you a lot for that very catchy phrase, no transition without transmission. I've been invited here as a representative of the Danish government to give a case study of the transmission infrastructure's role in the Danish green transition. First, I would like to give just a brief introduction to the Danish Energy Agency and the Center for Global Cooperation, where I am working currently. So the Danish Energy Agency is a government agency under the Danish Ministry of Climate, Utility and Energy. We are sort of the nodal agency for the Danish government-to-government relations on energy transition in a number of partner countries. I think that currently our number of partner countries is 24, and as you see, we are working with a lot of high emitters and a lot of countries that in the coming years will be important partners in the energy transition. Denmark was joining the Powering Past Coal Alliance in 2017. And our own target for phasing out coal completely is set to be in the year 2028. So a bit of history and a bit of story from our past on how we started our transition and what steps we took to be at the place where we are today. I'll take you way back to the 1970s, where before the oil crisis, the Danish energy sector was actually the energy sector in the world that was most dependent on oil. We had just transitioned all of our central power plants to be completely driven and fueled by oil. But then in 1973, the oil crisis occurred, and we had to swiftly change our energy demand to make sure that we were not dependent on geopolitical issues and problems, but also were ensuring that we could be at one point of time self-supplying with energy. So in 1973, a new drive and a new policy change started, making sure that we could utilize our own resources, and then skip to the day-to-day where we have 2.7 gigawatt of offshore wind out of a capacity of 12 gigawatt, meaning that Denmark is one of the most is one of the countries with the highest integration of renewables in the whole world. The vision looking forward then is by 2030, Denmark would have 70% reduction of levels from 1990 greenhouse gases. By 2030, the ambition is also to have 100% green electricity in our grid. By 2045, we are aiming and targeting complete climate neutrality. And by 2050, we are aiming for 110% greenhouse gas reduction from 1990 levels, meaning that by 2050, we should actually have a negative impact on the greenhouse gas emissions, meaning that with carbon capture, we will actually suck out more greenhouse gases from the atmosphere than we emit. So, as I was saying, Denmark has one of the highest shares of renewables in the world, and I actually think that the correct statement is that Denmark has the highest share in the world when it comes to variable renewable energy sources, meaning wind and solar. Our average number is around 50% in our electricity production, but this has been made and this has been done without compromising the security of supply. The official number is 99.996% of security of supply, which is amounting to approximately 20 minutes of outage time for each consumer in Denmark. So, going a bit deeper into the topic of today, transmission grids. First of all, if you're not aware of Denmark's position in the world, I can tell you that we are a small peninsula, more or less, with a few islands around, but sticking out from Germany in the north of Europe. We have a lot of neighbors, but many of them have water in between us. So this means that for us to be interconnected, we need to build a lot of subsea cables. And this is something that we have done since the 1970s, where the first HVDC cable to Norway was built. And this development has just continued until today, where we actually are the most interconnected countries in Europe relative to domestic electricity consumption. As you know, there is a liberalized power market in Europe, where you can say different production profiles means that different countries can trade with each other. Norway has a lot of pumped hydro as well as hydro reservoirs, meaning that they are basically the battery of all of Europe. We are unlocking this feature in Norway by being the interconnecting country for this energy. In many ways, you can, with that, say that Denmark is actually a transit country for energy flows. These interconnectors that we have built gives us a lot of opportunities and gives us a lot of benefits. Basically, it is very important for the efficient integration of renewables. It gives us a reliable security of supply and reduces the dependency on local weather conditions. And then it also opens up new market opportunities.
Thank you so much, Andreas.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have a chance to hear further from Andreas later on in the question and answer section, and please keep in mind some of the questions that you have coming up. Fascinating insights, and absolutely such a pleasure to hear from Andreas in the context of Denmark's amazing leadership in this space, the highest integration of renewable electricity, most interconnected country relative to domestic consumption. Those are some success stories that need to be celebrated, and those lessons shared. So thank you so much, Andreas. Next, we have Marcus. Marcus joins us from the UK and is currently the lead of the Green Grids Initiative, and will be sharing with us the Green Grids Initiative playbook and some other insights. Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you, Georgie, and hello, everybody. And thank you, Lucy, for sharing my slides. If you could just stick it onto screen show. Oops. There we go. Right. So as Georgie says, I lead the Green Grids Initiative on behalf of the UK government. Just briefly on the Green Grids Initiative, we were launched at COP26 in partnership with the Indian government and their One Sun, One World, One Grid ambition. Our aim, put simply, is to help accelerate the delivery of grids to facilitate the energy transition. As Georgie says in her intro, grids are the backbone of the energy transition. We need to electrify most of society in order to meet net zero. And so our role is really to try and help accelerate that, because as has been said before, there is no transition without transmission. And the way we're doing it is we're working in Africa at the moment and in the Asia Pacific regions, where we've brought together a community of collaborators to work on some of the problems and to try and accelerate projects, share knowledge, and make these projects happen where there's blockers and stumbling blocks. But we're not stopping there. We are looking to expand globally. Our remit is global, and we will be developing the initiative over the coming months and years. But one of the things I want to talk to you about today is the electricity transition playbook. Next slide, please. And this is a tool that we're developing with our partners, Climate Compatible Growth, and other experts across the world, to really provide a toolkit for governments to help them navigate and work out how to make their own transitions to clean energy futures, and also to enable energy access. It's in the form of a high-level guide for ministers to really distill down the challenges and the policy areas that they need to think about, but also in the form of a training course and a tool for officials and decision makers, really. And that's going to be presented online, but also delivered through in-person workshops as well. We trialed it in July this year in Trieste on a 4-day course, and Marietta, who's speaking later today, was a part of that cohort, and we'll be formally launching it at COP28. But what it does, it frames the problem around 9 net zero building blocks. So if you think about, in order to get to a clean energy system, you need to think about all these things. So the long-term vision and plan for the energy mix. What do you need? Where are you aiming for? What are you looking for? The political support and policy tools to enable to get there, and who's doing that really well at the moment. So what can we leverage? The market and the delivery mechanism. How do you bring on new renewables? How do you support them through various mechanisms? Network infrastructure. How do you build the grids? How do you plan those grids? How do you get through permitting and things like that? And operability, you've got to be able to operate the system. And then what technology is needed to support it? What are the enabling technologies? So how does electric vehicles, maybe data and digital and broadband and various things interact with the system? And then of course, you've got to be able to build it. So what's the supply chain strategy? What's the skills and resources strategy as well? Because those are going to be pinch points if they're not planned carefully. And energy and electricity affects everybody. So how are consumers involved? Consumers have to interact with their energy system differently to how they do it today. And also communities are going to see new energy assets in their localities and their regions. And so how as governments, do we bring them along and engage with them so they can feel part of that energy transition? And finally, you've got to be able to finance it. You've got to be able to pay for it. So what are the financial tools and approaches that you can use to deliver that? So I can't cover it all today. So I'm just going to touch on a few areas and give a little bit of a taster, really. So Lucy, can you go to the next slide, please? So the first area is the delivery mechanism. So within that, we look at the types of market structures that you could put in, the tools that you can use for bringing on new renewables, auction mechanisms, the frameworks, and how they need to link up, how they need to enable investment, but equally, provide a good value for the consumer. So the role of regulation and how that plays is a really important part of the delivery mechanism. What maybe codes that may be needed, and really how that can be brought together to support the transition. Next slide, please. The next element is network infrastructure. So how to go about energy planning and thinking about those networks. I mean, one of the takeaways for me when I look at this, and my background in energy planning, is that traditionally we've planned from today out and done incremental least cost developments. Really, when we're looking for a transition and a transformation, you need to look right at the end point. What's that net zero system going to look like, and build back from there? And that means different decision processes and different planning approaches. So you need to look at that. And again, regulatory approvals and supports are really important for that. So that's on the planning and agreeing what you need to build. And then alongside that, how you go about it, how do you permit it, how you work with communities. So again, we dig into that as part of that module, and share best practice and some of the thinking about putting up renewable zones and things like that. And Marietta's going to touch on a little bit about that and what they're doing in the Philippines. Next slide, please. It's fine having a grid and an energy market that's you want to work, but if you can't operate the grid, you're going to be in real trouble. So in this area we discuss some of the issues around operability and the 8 operability challenges of frequency, reserve, stability, voltage, thermal, restoration, energy balancing, and system adequacy. This is in order to bring officials up to speed on this, but also on some of the solutions that are being deployed out there today. And now some network operators and system operators are getting to the ability to be able to operate carbon free. And if you don't get these tools and these mechanisms in place early, before you get to high levels of renewable on your system, they will be a blocker. So this is a really important part of the solution, really. Next slide, please. And then finally, I mentioned that you need to be able to fund it, you need to be able to pay for it, and this is a big challenge that governments and system operators and transmission owners are facing. And the way we look at it here are, what are the financial mechanisms that can be brought to bear and support generator projects, but also grid projects, and where's the cutting edge? How's private finance being brought into systems where they're largely publicly owned? What's the role of concessionary finance, and how does that work? And this is again a tool for maybe energy folk to understand really how to bring the finance bit into that. So that's bringing that together. And Mackenzie's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with Zizabona, and some of the learning we're doing around that. Next slide, please. So that's really is a whistle-stop tour of some of the things that the playbook will cover. We're going to be formally launching it at COP28. The material will be available online from then. We're running a number of events. We're planning to host some in-person events in Brazil and potentially Namibia in the new year as part of the energy modelling platform that's being run by Climate Compatible Growth, and also the Climate Compatible Growth Summer School in Trieste in July, which is where we held the pilot this year. But there will be other events as well. We are working through our program, and we'll also be doing online webinars, the first of which is a teaser one in October, looking at civil society and energy planning. But there will be more, so keep an eye out for our website, or if you want to get involved, drop me a line. Thank you very much. Over to you, Georgie.
Thank you so much, Marcus. That's such a valuable insight into the playbook, and we're all counting down to COP28 when it will be officially launched. We are very excited about this opportunity for a toolkit to provide support to policymakers, operators, developers. The challenge is so difficult and involves so many different stakeholder groups that this will hopefully be a very useful tool, and that the 9 parts of that framework really highlighted the complexity of the challenge. I also thought that that your observations around forward planning and planning out is so critical. You know, we're used to sort of not necessarily looking as far out, but the role of master planning and also setting those targets and combining considerations around everything from supply chain to operability. You know, you've really just touched on so many challenges there. So looking forward to opening that up further in the Q&A as well. And now to go to our next speaker, Marietta Kujati. Welcome. Thank you so much. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georgie. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to be part of this webinar. And thank you for the nice introduction, Marcos, for my presentation, for presenting the Philippine experience wherein I've been a part of the Net Zero Playbook. And today I'm going to present the challenges and solutions to building transmission and infrastructure to connect to renewable energy generation in Philippine centers. To give you a background of our country, as you would know, that the Philippines is an archipelagic country which comprises more than 7,000 islands. And the more the transmission infrastructure challenges integrating large-scale renewable energy facilities. According to the study of DOE and USAID in the competitive renewable energy zones, or CREZ, we call CREZ, the deployment of large-scale wind and solar generation may only require a year or less, while transmission planning and development may take 10 or more years. RE generators development requires financing, but remote wind or solar resources cannot be financed until transmission access is available. However, transmission lines cannot be built without cost recovery certainty or demonstrated need from wind or solar generation. The DOE realizes the need to plan transmission infrastructure ahead of the implementation of RE targets. DOE spearheaded the assessment of renewable energy with technical assistance of the USAID and NREL according to its geographical locations and availability of transmission infrastructure network to address investment risk brought by barriers in development process. The CREZ vision is to use transmission to direct RE development to places that optimize use of indigenous resources and maximize benefit to the Filipino people. These barriers that were identified resulted to increasing share of traditional plants in our electricity generation mix. Since 2018, since 2008, the government promulgated the Renewable Energy Act to scale up renewable energy. We have had couples of mechanisms born out of this law. Despite these efforts, more than half of or 60% of the total electricity production was supplied by coal in 2022, while renewables only accounted for about 22%, and the rest is gas. This means that we need to do more to decarbonize our electricity sector. How do we then implement our decarbonization targets? The DOE set up a target of increasing the share of renewable energy in the generation mix by 35% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. These targets correspond to a substantial deployment of solar with about 45 gigawatt by 2040 and wind by 11 gigawatts by 2040. The solution is to designate renewable energy zones near transmission network, which we call the CRESS process. The government led the conduct of CRESS process by issuing a department circular to establishing the development of competitive renewable energy zones in the country in 2018 to support the DOE in overcoming renewable energy development obstacles such as transmission constraints, regulatory barriers, and financial investments by the private sectors. The CRESS process involved key stakeholders such as transmission corporation, a state-owned agency which handles the grid, and the grid concessionaire, which is the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, grid and off-grid distribution utilities, market operator, regulator, and private sector representatives from different groups related to renewable energy. The output of this CRESS process, first, it has identified abundant, high-quality economic RE resources. The project has identified 25 RE zones across the Philippines and have estimated a gross capacity of more than 150 gigawatt of new wind and solar photovoltaics, 365 geothermal, and 375 megawatt of biomass, and over 650 gigawatt of hydro capacity. It has also reduced RE development barriers. Designating RE zones is expected to result in maximum megawatt hour for the invested capital for renewable generation and transmission. And also reduce curtailment of RE generation, high capacity factors resulting in high utilization of transmission assets. And lastly, it has improved national coordination for power system planning. The identified RE zones were adopted in the national renewable energy plans and programs of the country, and capacity expansion under the Philippine Energy Plan and Transmission Development Plan. It has also enhanced opportunities for RE investment. RE zones provide opportunities for RE projects with high capacity factors and lower cost per megawatt hour than other opportunities. Sorry. The key takeaways for designating RE zones are, first, it advances energy sector goals for the Philippines. The decarbonization target was set according to the identified RE zones. And in the next PEP update, target extends to 2050. The government is set to embark on offshore wind resources to fill up the target, since there is a substantial capacity of about 170 gigawatt of wind energy source as identified by the World Bank study. Offshore wind is not yet designated in the RE zones. Thus, we need to redo this CRESS process. It also strengthens energy sector coordination with the stakeholders. CRESS process was conducted with key stakeholders for both the government and private sectors. And lastly, it supports transparent, supports transparent transmission planning. The system owner and operator was involved in the process, and transmission planning was transparent then. And the last one is it reduces the risk for private sector RE investment. The designated RE zones were optimally situated near the grids, and economically viable, hence avoids the barriers such as financing, load curtailment, among others. Thus, will ultimately result in reducing risk for early investment.
Thank you so much.
That-
Thank you very much. That's the incredible insights and work that's been happening in the Philippines, and very, very useful to hear, particularly about the renewable energy zones and the way that those have been designed and effective, and some very important lessons there. And a reminder to all of our participants online, you will have the opportunity a lot more, I'm sure, that Marietta and others can help to outline in terms of work and the planning and the design of all of these different instruments to support building out grid infrastructure and transmissions. And now joining us from Johannesburg, we have our next guest and panelist, Moketsky, who is joining us from the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, a special fund administered by the African Development Bank. And Moketsky has also been working with the Green Grids Initiative on a variety of things, including Zazabone, the project that I'm sure he'll outline further. So welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Georgie. Thank you for the opportunity. I will talk about building transmission lines across multiple jurisdictions. And I will start by sharing my screen. And if you allow me, I will switch off my video as I do the presentation, as that should hopefully assist with the bandwidth. So the presentation will be framed within the context of just energy transition. And this is because, in addition to building transmission, the focus is to enable the integration of renewable energy generation. And this is done on a regional basis. I think as part of this discussion, it's good to just highlight the investment requirements. And this is an issue that has been discussed on many platforms. But in the case of Africa, there's an estimate of USD 10 billion per annum that is required between 2026 and 2030. And it's essentially triple the amount that was required for transmission investments between 2016 and 2020. From Africa's perspective, we also acknowledge that you have several countries that have more renewable energy resources than what they can utilize because of the size of the economy and the development trajectory. And in many instances, the only way to harness those renewable energy resources is through regional integration. And that is where transmission becomes important. We also know that public institutions are constrained in terms of providing financing for transmission and other infrastructure, which is why there's a need to consider alternative models, which also then include the private sector, considering that the public sector cannot undertake these investments on its own. There's also a recognition that in building grid investments to support the integration of renewable energy generation, there's also an opportunity to address long-standing operational and financing bottlenecks. And the project that I will discuss during this presentation has elements of these factors. Within the African continent, we are working on the interconnection of the various power pools that are currently at different levels of integration. Currently, there is some level of integration within the 5 regional power pools that operate in Africa. SAPP, more advanced in the Southern African region, West African power pool, also taking some strides to integrate, and also Eastern Africa power pool. What the Continental Power System Master Plan seeks to do is to work with the regional power pools to create a continental market, which is the Africa Single Electricity Market. And that would require infrastructure. It would require transmission infrastructure. It would also require generation infrastructure. And essentially, the Continental Power System Master Plan, or CMP, supports the creation of that market through developing a blueprint for the infrastructure that would be required. In the end, what is being envisaged would be various corridors across the continent, from the west to the south to the north, that would then link up the various regional power pools. We've already spoken about some of the challenges that affect the development of transmission, primarily the mismatch in terms of the lead times between transmission development and renewable energy and generation development. Also challenges relating to the location. It's good that the Energy Transition Playbook highlights the need to address supply chain constraints, because that is always something that typically gets left to the end when suddenly there's a realization that all these projects that are supposed to happen at the same time may not necessarily have the necessary components. And some of them are being required in other segments of the economy, copper being a good example if one looks at the development of the electric vehicle market. Financing has been highlighted, but I think it's good to also say that before we even get to the point where we're looking at investment financing, it's key to have a good pipeline of bankable projects. And this is where project preparation and structuring and also dealing with the environment for investment become crucial. These are some of the aspects that we are covering as part of the Africa Working Group of the Green Grids Initiative. And this is a working group that was established in 2021 under the auspices of the African Union, and essentially providing a collaborative platform to address these issues in a consolidated way. So we're looking at technical assistance, financing, as well as political engagement, just in terms of supporting the regulatory environment. As part of this process, we have selected a project in the Southern African region, Zizabona, which links Botswana to Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe to Zambia, as well as Zambia to Namibia. So it's 3 sections. And essentially, the reason why this was selected is that the initial studies that were done for the development of this project did not consider the potential for renewable energy generation in Botswana and Namibia. So the idea was that if we are going to accelerate this project, it would be good to start with looking at how these resources could be integrated through the region as facilitated by this transmission project. It's a proof of concept, and the idea is that what we are able to develop using this project can then be applied across the other projects in the region. It would be good to just highlight that the approach that we've taken is to consolidate the review of existing feasibility and environmental social impact assessment studies. This is something that typically is not done. Normally, the feasibility studies and environmental studies are done separately. We've decided to consolidate this, and this is part of the innovation and also the attempt to accelerate projects. part of this approach is also to link up the project preparation with the structuring of projects, looking at different models that could be used to finance the project. And I think just finally highlighting some of the key considerations that we need to keep in mind. We cannot emphasize enough the role of transmission in terms of supporting energy transition, and essentially from the African continent's perspective, looking at the CMP as essentially the blueprint that would be used to integrate various regions through transmission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maketsuki. They were very, very insightful comments at the end there, and particularly the point and the role of the proof of concept of Zizabona. Very interested to track that and the important work that you're doing, and also through the Green Grids initiative. We come to Q&A now, and thank you very much. We've got some questions in the chat. Please continue to post your questions, which we'll get to throughout this session. We very much want this to be interactive and for everyone to have the opportunity to ask as many questions as you like, given this complex subject matter. I might turn first actually to the role of financing, and thank you very much. We've received a question from one of our participants, Max. I'm interested in how countries and MDBs look at incentivizing financing of these projects. What incentives and mechanisms, e.g. political risk guarantees, do the panelists think need to be put in place to catalyse private sector investment, particularly in emerging economies? I know everyone on this panel will have a view, and I'm thinking that in particular, we might hear from a couple of panelists on this subject. Marcus, do you want to kick us off with this one, and just from a sort of the role of the Green Grids working across the globe, where is your sense of this question? And then I might turn to Marietta and Maketsuki.
Sure. Thank you, Georgie. I mean, absolutely, finance is one of the challenge areas for grids. And some of the work we've been doing, and Maketsuki's touched on a little bit with the Zizabona project and project preparation, and we're doing something similar with a project in Laos as well, which is really from a big grid project it takes a long time to deliver, so the finance has got to be patient. So in order to bring in private finance, how can you help de-risk it? And we're looking at ways to bring in concessionary finance to help de-risk those projects, and underwrite, particularly some of the preparation stage, so the developer is not having to invest so much at that early stage. And so that's one of the elements that we're looking at. We're talking with working with the development banks and people like the Green Climate Fund around how they assess those projects as well in terms of the climate benefit, to enable us to unlock that finance. And that's a real key thing, because it's quite easy to determine the climate benefit of a solar farm or a wind farm, but the grid, because it can carry whatever energy is flowing, it's not so clear. So we need tools and mechanisms and rules in order to do that, and that's one of the things that we're focusing on. And Zizabona will be helping demonstrate the benefit of the grid from that perspective, and enable us to dig into that piece of finance, which is not the full solution, but helps to unlock the project to a degree and take some of that risk out of it for the developer. But I think some of the other panelists might have further views as well. So hand over there. Thanks
so much, Marcus. Maketsuki, do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I think thank you very much, Georgie. Without repeating what Marcus has already indicated, it's important to de-risk the project right up front through enhancing the investment environment. And that is why there's a lot of time that needs to be spent on planning, looking at regulations. For instance, if there is a transmission line or project that would be funded through the private sector, what would be the revenue model to support the kind of investment? And it also then goes to broader issues around what the market structure might look like. Certainly, the role of concessional finance is key, But that comes right at the end when you do have a bankable project. But it does help to have that as part of the roadmap, so that you're able to lower the cost of capital.
Thank you so much, Maketsuki. And then I think, it's very interesting in the context of the difference, obviously, here in terms of emerging markets versus other different types of markets. And I just, on this question, Andreas, I mean, can you give us a little bit of insight in the context of where Denmark started with all of this, and also what you're seeing across the region in Europe and in the UK in terms of financing for these projects? And are there any lessons and learnings to draw on from that in terms of how these projects, sort of actually get financed and give certainty and confidence to developers and to financiers?
Yeah, sure. I think what we have developed in Denmark and Europe is what I would call a split of the risk, especially when we look at transmission build out for the integration of renewable for specific renewable projects. There's always a risk associated with it. What if the project doesn't amount to anything? What if the plant is not being built? Who will then bear the risk? And we have, at least in the Danish regulatory framework, made some sort of checkpoints that ensures that if a project is not being built at the correct time, or if it's not being built at all, then there's actually a bank guarantee supplied by either the company itself or a third party that can ensure that the transmission utility is actually able to retrieve some of the funds that they have put down before the plant was built.
Thank you. And we'll turn to a kind of another subject now. And I think we've got one for you, Marietta, which relates to service contracts and the offshore wind industry in the Philippines. And of course, we know that there is a large renewable energy resource in the Philippines, significant wind resource in particular, and globally we are seeing an uptick in terms of offshore wind. Here in the US, on the East Coast, there is a very significant role that offshore wind is playing. And so there is, each market globally can draw on lessons. And we've got a question around service contracts. How do the newly issued service contracts for offshore wind affect the country's transmission planning? And when will the grid be ready to receive offshore wind capacity? Over to you, Marietta.
Thank you for that question. Actually, we have had a lot of service contract that was awarded for offshore wind. It's more than 50 gigawatt now. So what we're doing is we have technical assistance from we're seeking for a technical assistance from some development partners to do the grid transmission development master plan, and we are discussing about it now because of this influx of the investment for renewable energy, especially for offshore wind. And we have had a lot of plans to do our energy transition plans, like those displacement for coal, because of to accelerate this renewable energy. So we're taking it step by step, and then we are also planning to have this renewable energy zones process again to include the offshore wind. And we have also with us, I think, we have a technical assistance also, I think, with the Denmark regarding this offshore wind.
Thanks, Marietta. Thank you. Thank you. Andreas, did you want to make a comment there?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Marietta. Very, very important subject. And of course, these sorts of transmission infrastructure systems require both existing technology and evolving technology, and the role of technology and technology improvement is a very significant subject. And all of the different parts of these technologies, whether it be solar, storage, cables, have had different evolutions in terms of innovation. And we have a question from the audience around that. What does the rate of technological improvement / cost reduction look like in terms of transmission projects, cables, transformers, subsea mapping, etc.? And are there any barriers in the supply chain? And so, an important question around that kind of technological improvement and the timelines around that and the supply chain risks. Andreas, did you have a kind of a view on that? And then I might turn to Marcus as well to answer that challenging question.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it is a challenging question and a challenge in itself. For sure, some of the barriers that we are experiencing at the moment is actually labor. Have skilled labor to actually be able to do the installations. Ships that have the technical capability to pull a cable across the sea between Denmark and England they're also in very high demand. So of course there is so much infrastructure that needs to be arranged and planned around these large projects. So this is definitely some of the barriers in the pipeline at the moment.
Thanks, Marcus.
Yes, thanks for that. Interestingly, I was at a major manufacturer's last week talking around some of these issues, not so much the sort of technology, new technology such, but actually, capacity and supply chain. So, I echo Andrus's point that, there is a potential capacity bottleneck. Some of it might be factory space, but that can be dealt with. But a key problem is, resources and skilled engineers to actually design some of the things. And also, Andreas mentioned ships. We were talking about HVDC offshore and platforms. I think there is one ship globally that is big enough to the crane to lift the platform on at the moment. So, just think about the amount of growth that's predicted in this sector, and how does that happen? And I think the challenge then is how do you get the supply chain to build the capacity and create it? And that comes down to being able to let long-term contracts and to have a good, real strong pipeline of projects. Mackenzie touched on a little bit about having a pipeline of projects in Africa. We need that visibility so the supply chain can invest. And the other thing that the challenge around supply chain, which is we're seeing now as a potential solution, is more interoperability between some of the major manufacturers as well, and standardization of sizes, which is going to help the ability to build out. But I would say that we need to put a real focus on the supply chain. That's one of the things within GGI that we're looking at the moment in anger, because we don't want that to be the thing that stops the grid getting on the ground or getting in the air or getting in the sea. But at the moment, it's a real risk.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and certainly echo those comments from my own experience and from working for a large developer for many years. There's an opportunity to be transformative within the supply chain, but then there are just the real hard issues around manufacturing and those constraints in terms of manufacturing slots, availability and demand, and those are very, very challenging questions. I'm going to take a quick question from Elizabeth, and then I'm conscious we'll wrap up very close to the hour. Given the long timeframes for building transmission infrastructure, what are some of the alternatives that can be explored in the interim? Are there ways to actually look at alternative locations for renewable energy and installations? And are there other models? And I mean, I think the focus of this is looking at the role of and the importance of transmission infrastructure. But I think Moketski, you might have a view, as well as Marietta, on the sequencing of building these projects, and particularly with the sort of renewable energy zones and that master planning work actually kind of leading up to transmission infrastructure. I wonder whether you wanted to share some insights there, turning first to Moketski and then also to Marietta.
I think that's a very, very important question. And I think linking to the concept of renewable energy zones that Marietta spoke about, there's also the opportunity to have what they call strategic environment impact assessments, where you don't do environmental assessments or permitting on a project-by-project basis, but you do that, say, in a zone. And this is particularly important for transmission because you can get the process going much earlier. You may not be able to get into the detail, but once you get to a point where you are working on specific projects, then there isn't that much that needs to be done. I think also then on the technology front, there are also opportunities where you can use battery energy storage systems, for instance, as part of a transmission deferral option. Obviously, this works where you have existing grid, but you may not necessarily have to invest in a typical transmission project because now there is the technology that has become available. I think what we're doing with Zizabona is interesting in the sense that we've combined feasibility studies and environmental permitting. So the technical studies and environmental permitting are being done as one project, as opposed to two separate projects which need to be coordinated. And there you might lose time as well. So that's one of the innovations that we're working on currently.
Thank you so much. Marietta?
Yeah, for us, it is very important that transmission is available before this renewable energy gets in place. We had experience before that there was an influx in one area where there's no transmission system, and so what happened is that it was not connected with the grid, so there was a problem with that. So that has motivated the Department of Energy to do something for zoning of this, designating renewable energy to which are near the grid. It is because the transmission infrastructure takes a long time, like 8 to 10 years before it gets in place, because we have a lot of barriers before this transmission infrastructure will be in place. That's why there was a lot of opportunity for this, for the transmission planning, and then those along with the barriers, not only the transmission planning, it's also it has also addressed the financing risk other than transmission, because if you are able to put up the power plant without any other barriers other than the transmission, then also the financing companies will also will be available. The finance will be available if those projects are located near the transmission system. And also with this, with our new updating of the PEP targets, or the decarbonization targets, we have more targets than what we have in the 2020 to 2040 Philippine Energy Plan. We are targeting more than 50% by 2050. So it is very important that this barrier will be addressed ahead of this implementation of the plan. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marietta. Very helpful. Marcus, I think you've got a comment on that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and the answer is really, we need such an energy transition that you have to throw everything at it. I was relating to the sort of the GB market and things that happen there. We brought on renewable energy before the grid was ready because the grid wasn't full all of the time, but it was full some of the time, and that enabled the grid to get reduce its carbon significantly, but you end up with constraints. And the issue then is can you still build the transmission whilst dealing with those constraints? And now we have constraints in the UK and the GB in the billions of dollars, billions of pounds area, and it's becoming a challenge. And so we've looked at non-network solutions, non-asset solutions, commercial solutions to batteries being built at certain locations, things like that. And it's consultation looking at zoning energy prices, so that makes it more a stronger signal to developers to put their projects in an area where there's more grid capacity. Personally, I think you need to do that. You still need to build the stuff, so that will buy you some time, but you do need to build the grid. So the answer to the question is, in my view, you need all of it. And if you want to get your renewables on quicker, there's things you can do, but you still fundamentally you've got to build the grids as well. No transition without transmission.
Marcus, you exactly on point. That was where I was going to land this panel discussion at the end. We are needing to wrap up now, and very, very appreciative for all of those questions from the audience and for the engagement on this subject matter. We're delighted to be able to answer those questions. I just want to finish off by kind of asking our panelists, what are their, in one or two sentences, what do we need to be looking forward towards, in the concept of the importance of grid interconnectedness, in the context of the importance of energy transmission, and also the challenges that we've heard today. What hope is there, and what can we be looking forward to in the next sort of 5 to 10 years? And you can address that question in the context of practicalities. What do we need to be doing, or what are we excited about? And maybe I'll turn first to our last panelist, Moketsky, if you want to comment on that, and then Marietta, Marcus, and Andreas.
I think quickly from the perspective of what we're doing within the Africa Working Group of the Green Grids Initiative, the most exciting aspect of this process is the opportunity to what we call hybridize different types of renewable energy. So you have solar, wind, and hydro. And you find in many instances that you cannot have those different sources within the same country, within the same border. And that helps then to deal with making renewable energy more sustainable, because you can begin to match the demand, but more important, you can also use that to manage the capacity of the grid. So that is certainly something that we are looking at.
Thank you so much. Marietta?
For the Philippines, yes, it's very important. As I've said, that the Philippines is an archipelagic country. So then connection has more challenges, but we are able to get through with this. We have in place three main grids, and that to be able to put in place these targets, there has to be a commitment of the government to ensure that renewable energy will be there, and if the government signals this, that the government has commitment to decarbonize the electricity sector, then all these investor and other stakeholders will follow. So that's why we have a lot of this service contracts that has been awarded.
Thank you so
That's
much,
all.
Mariette. Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, I think what excites me around this is, you know, every country has got to solve this problem. Every country needs to have a clean grid, and the ability for us to work together on the solutions, because country A has worked something out and country B needs to learn that. I think that opportunity to work multilaterally on this project, on this problem, so should I say, this problem of climate change and problem of delivering this green energy system, that's really exciting. We can flow energy across borders. We can join it up. It's challenging, it's hard, we've got to find the money, we've got to do these things, but we don't really have an alternative. And it's very exciting because we can use this as a glue to bring the international community together as well. So that's what excites me about this. And I'm going to say it again, there's no transition without transmission. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. Andreas.
Yeah, I think the most interesting developments and future challenges for us here in Denmark and the north of Europe is going to be the offshore sector. We have only just started building offshore energy production. By 2030, 9 countries have pledged to fill up 120 gigawatts of offshore wind in the North Sea. And I mean, the logistics and the planning and the organization behind this is going to be immense completely. But I also think that it will definitely change the energy future of Europe for sure.
Thank you so much. And with that in mind, and we are running over time, so I'm going to wrap this up, but it's been delightful to hear from all of our panelists from across the world, going to show how much we're all in this together. This is a shared challenge and a shared opportunity to build out grid infrastructure, both domestically, regionally, multilaterally, that involves everyone in the community, including policymakers, developers, suppliers, regulators. And so I want to thank everyone on this panel, Moketski, Marietta, Marcus, Andreas, and also our host for this panel, Powering Past Coal Alliance, Julia and the team. Thank you so much for hosting this together with the Green Grids Initiative. And we look forward to seeing you for more important conversations on this matter going forward. So thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to everyone who joined.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.